It was a bright and sunny Saturday morning in Maple Grove. This was a small, quiet neighborhood where houses sat close together and kids played in the yards. Everyone knew everyone, or at least that's what they thought. The streets were lined with green trees and birds chirped happily in the air. It felt like a perfect little place to live. But something exciting was about to happen, something no one saw coming. Let me tell you about Jake Miller. Jake was a regular guy, or so it seemed. He had just moved into a little house on Elm Street. He was the new kid on the block, and he was busy making his new home his own. Jake had short brown hair, a friendly smile, and a pair of old sneakers he wore everywhere. He liked working outside, and on this sunny morning he was in his yard fixing things up. He had a shovel in his hand and a plan in his head. Now Jake wanted to make a garden, a small one with flowers and maybe some vegetables. To do that, he needed water. So he started digging a tiny hole in his wooden fence. It wasn't a big hole, just big enough to run a water line through. No big deal, right? Well, not to everyone. Across the street lived Karen Perkins. Now, Karen wasn't like most neighbors. She was the boss of the HOA, that's the group that makes rules for the neighborhood. Karen loved rules more than anything. She carried a clipboard everywhere she went, writing down anything she didn't like. She had sharp eyes and a frown that could scare a cat. Her hair was always pulled back tight, and she wore bright pink flip-flops that slapped the ground when she walked. Karen thought she owned Maple Grove. She thought everyone should listen to her, and when she saw Jake, oh boy, she did not like him one bit. "Newbies don't belong here," Karen would mutter to herself. She stood at her window, peeking through the blinds like a spy. She watched Jake every day since he moved in. She didn't like his messy yard. She didn't like his old truck parked out front. And she really didn't like that he didn't say hi to her when he walked by. To Karen, Jake was trouble. She didn't know him, but she already decided he was bad news. And then on that sunny Saturday, she saw the hole in his fence. That tiny little hole. To Jake, it was nothing. To Karen, it was like he'd broken every rule in the book. Karen's eyes got big when she saw it. She pressed her nose against the window, staring hard. "A hole in the fence," she whispered to herself. "That's not allowed. That's against the rules." She grabbed her clipboard and wrote it down fast. To her, that hole was a crime. It was an attack on the whole neighborhood. She thought it made everything look ugly. She thought it would ruin Maple Grove forever. Karen didn't care that it was small or that Jake had a good reason. She just saw red. She was mad, and she was going to do something about it. Jake, though, he didn't even notice Karen watching. He was too busy. He wiped sweat off his forehead and kept digging. The sun was warm, and he was happy to be outside. He hummed a little song as he worked. To him, the hole was just a step to making his garden. He didn't think anyone would care. He didn't know Karen was already planning her next move. He didn't know she was about to turn his quiet day into a big mess. But here's the thing, Jake wasn't as simple as he looked. There was something about him Karen didn't know, something big, and it was going to surprise her in a way she'd never expect. Let's rewind a bit. Jake had moved to Maple Grove just 2 weeks ago. He came in a beat-up truck with a few boxes and a chair tied to the back. The neighbors waved when he pulled up, and he waved back. He seemed nice enough. He said hi to the mailman and helped old Mrs. Carter carry her groceries one day. Everyone liked Jake, well, almost everyone. Karen didn't. From the moment she saw him, she decided he didn't fit in. She didn't like how he didn't mow his lawn right away. She didn't like how he left his trash cans out an extra day. And now this hole in the fence, to Karen, it was proof she was right about him all along. But Jake didn't care what Karen thought. He wasn't here to make trouble. He just wanted a quiet life. He liked Maple Grove because it was peaceful. He liked the big trees and the friendly faces. He didn't know much about the HOA or its rules. He didn't even know Karen was the boss of it. All he knew was that he had a house, a yard, and a plan for a garden. That was enough for him. So he kept working, digging that little hole, not thinking twice about it. Meanwhile, Karen was steaming. She stood at her window, tapping her foot. She couldn't believe Jake was so calm. Didn't he know the rules? Didn't he care? She thought he was rude. She thought he was sneaky. She thought he was up to no good. "Who does he think he is?" she said out loud. Her cat, Mr. Whiskers, looked up from the couch but didn't answer. Karen didn't need him to. She already had her mind made up. That hole was a problem and she was going to fix it. She didn't know how yet, but she'd figure it out. She always did. Back in his yard, Jake finished digging. He stepped back and looked at the hole. It was perfect, just the right size. He smiled to himself. "This'll work," he said quietly. He grabbed a hose and started threading it through. He was almost done when he heard a noise. It was a loud huff from across the street. He looked up and saw Karen staring at him. Her arms were crossed and her face was all scrunched up. Jake waved at her just to be nice. Karen didn't wave back. She turned and marched inside, slamming her door. Jake shrugged. "Weird lady," he thought, then went back to work. What Jake didn't know was that Karen was already plotting. She sat at her kitchen table with her clipboard and a pen. She wrote down everything she saw. "Hole in fence," she scribbled. "New guy rude, breaking rules." She tapped the pen on the table, thinking hard. She could complain to the HOA. She could tell the neighbors, or maybe she'd do something bigger. Something to really show Jake who was in charge. She didn't know what yet, but she'd figure it out soon. And when she did, Jake would be sorry. But here's the fun part. Jake wasn't worried at all. He didn't look scared or mad. He just kept doing his thing. Why? Because Jake had a secret, a big one. He wasn't just some guy with a shovel and a garden plan. There was more to him than that. Karen thought she knew everything, but she didn't. She thought Jake was ordinary, but he was. And that little hole in the fence, it was about to turn her whole world upside down. Hey, quick question for you. What would you do if your neighbor freaked out over something tiny like that? Like, imagine someone got mad at you for planting a flower or painting your door a funny color. Would you laugh? Would you talk to them? Tell me in the comments. I'm super curious. Oh, and if you're liking this story so far, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Because trust me, it's going to get wild. See, Maple Grove wasn't ready for what was coming. Karen thought she was the queen, but Jake, he was about to show her something she'd never forget. That sunny Saturday morning was just the start. The hole in the fence was just the beginning. And Karen, she was walking right into a surprise she couldn't even dream of. Stick around, because this story's only getting started. Trouble started brewing fast in Jake's quiet little neighborhood. One sunny day, Jake grabbed a shovel and decided to dig a tiny hole in his wooden fence. It wasn't a big deal, just a small gap, barely big enough to peek through and say hi to his buddy who lived next door. Jake liked chatting with his friend about simple stuff, like what they'd eat for dinner or how the weather was. He figured a little hole wouldn't hurt anybody. It was his fence after all, and he wasn't breaking anything important. No harm, right? Nope, totally wrong. Karen Baxter, the nosy lady from across the street, spotted that hole faster than a hawk spots a tiny mouse scurrying through the grass. Her eyes were sharp and she never missed a thing. She'd been watching Jake ever since he moved in, like a detective looking for clues. That little hole in the fence, to her it was a giant problem. She didn't waste a single second. With her arms crossed tight and her lips pressed into a thin, angry line, she marched right over to Jake's yard. Her shoes clicked on the pavement, loud and fast, like she was on a mission. When she got to Jake, she didn't say hi or ask how his day was. Nope, she just barked at him loud and mean. "That's against the rules, young man," she snapped, pointing at the hole like it was a crime scene. "I'm warning you, fix it or else." Her voice was sharp, like a teacher scolding a kid for running in the halls. Jake looked up from his shovel, a little surprised. He didn't expect her to care so much about a tiny hole. He gave her a small smile and nodded, trying to be nice. "Okay, sure," he said, thinking she'd calm down and go back home. He figured she was just having a grumpy day. People get grumpy sometimes, right? He'd seen it before. But Karen didn't calm down, not even a little bit. She didn't smile back or say thanks. Instead, she huffed, puffing out her chest like an angry bird fluffing its feathers. Then she puffed some more, her face turning pink. She started muttering under her breath, saying stuff like standards and property values. Jake didn't really get what she meant. Standards, property values, it was just a hole. He wasn't tearing down the whole fence or painting it bright purple. But Karen acted like that little gap was the end of the world. She turned on her heel and stomped back to her house, still grumbling. Jake watched her go, scratching his head. He shrugged it off, thinking she'll get over it, but deep down he had a funny feeling in his stomach. Something told him Karen wasn't done yet, and guess what? He was so right. The next day, things got weirder. Jake was outside watering his flowers, nothing fancy, just some daisies he liked, when he noticed Karen peeking over her hedge. She wasn't being sneaky about it either. Her head stuck out like a turtle poking out of its shell, and her eyes were glued to him. She had a little notebook in her hand and a pencil, too. Every time Jake moved, she scribbled something down. Watering the flowers, scribble. Picking up a stick, scribble. Waving to the mailman. Scribble, scribble, scribble. Jake caught her staring and waved at her just to be friendly. But Karen didn't wave back. She ducked behind the hedge real quick, like she didn't want him to see her. Too late, Jake already did. "What's her deal?" Jake muttered to himself, shaking his head. He didn't get why she was so worked up. He wasn't loud or messy. He didn't throw wild parties or leave trash everywhere. He was just a guy trying to enjoy his new house. But Karen, she acted like he was some kind of troublemaker. It made Jake feel a little annoyed, but he brushed it off again. He wasn't the type to start fights over silly stuff. He went back inside, grabbed a soda, and plopped on his couch. She'll forget about it soon, he thought, except she didn't. A couple days later, Karen took it up a notch. Jake was out in his yard again, this time fixing a wobbly chair. The fence hole was still there, small and harmless. He hadn't gotten around to patching it yet. Honestly, he kind of liked it. It made talking to his buddy easier. But then he heard it, the sound of Karen's voice, loud and bossy, coming from her porch. She was on the phone, packing back and forth. Jake couldn't hear everything, but he caught bits and pieces. "Unacceptable," she said. "Rules are rules, and then someone needs to do something." Jake peeked over and saw her waving her arms around, looking madder than ever. He wondered who she was talking to. Her husband, a friend, the HOA people. He didn't know, but it didn't sound good. That night, Jake sat on his back porch, sipping lemonade and staring at the stars. The air was cool and everything felt peaceful except for that funny feeling still nagging at him. Corinne's huffing and puffing, her notebook, her phone call, it all added up to something. He couldn't figure out what, though. Maybe she's just lonely, he said to himself. Or maybe she really hates holes. He laughed a little, trying to shake it off. But the truth was, he didn't like how she kept watching him. It made his quiet new home feel less quiet, less safe even. He didn't want trouble, but trouble was sniffing around anyway. The next morning, things got even stranger. Jake woke up early to mow his lawn. The grass was getting tall and he wanted to keep it neat. He was halfway done when Corinne showed up again. This time, she didn't march over, she just stood on her porch staring. Her arms were crossed and her face was all scrunched up like she'd just bitten into a sour lemon. Jake waved, because that's what he always did. She didn't wave back. She just kept staring, her eyes locked on that little fence hole. Now Jake glanced at it too. It was still there, same as always. No bigger, no smaller, just a hole. But to Corinne, it was like a monster hiding in the yard. "Hey, Corinne," Jake called out, trying to lighten the mood. "Nice day, huh?" He smiled big, hoping she'd say something nice back. She didn't. She turned and went inside, slamming her door so hard the windows rattled. Jake stopped mowing and stood there, confused. "What's her problem?" he said out loud. He didn't get it. He wasn't hurting anybody. He wasn't breaking any big rules, at least he didn't think so. But Corinne was acting like he'd done something awful. It made him feel weird, like he was being judged for no reason. Later that afternoon, Jake's buddy from next door came over. His name was Tim, a goofy guy with a big laugh. They sat by the fence, chatting through the hole like usual. "What's with that lady?" Tim asked, nodding toward Corinne's house. "She's been glaring at me too." Jake shrugged. "Beats me. She's mad about this hole, I guess." Tim laughed. "A hole? That's nuts. It's not like you're digging a tunnel to rob a bank." Jake laughed too, but it didn't make the funny feeling go away. Corinne was up to something. He could sense it, like a storm cloud creeping closer. By the next day, the tension was thicker than ever. Jake was in his yard raking leaves when he saw Corinne again. This time, she wasn't alone. She had a man with her, some guy in a fancy shirt with a clipboard. They stood by her porch, pointing at Jake's fence and whispering. The man nodded a lot, writing stuff down. Jake's stomach twisted. "Who's that guy?" he wondered. "Is he from the HOA?" He didn't like where this was going. Corinne kept glancing over, her eyes narrow and sneaky. She thought Jake didn't notice, but he did. He noticed everything now. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Corinne, the hole, the clipboard guy. It was all so silly, but it didn't feel silly anymore. It felt big. He stared out his window at Corinne's house. Her lights were on and he could see her shadow moving around. What was she planning? Why did she care so much? Jake didn't know, but he had a hunch it wasn't good. He sighed and flopped back on his bed. "Just a hole," he muttered. "It's just a dumb little hole." But to Corinne, it was war. And war was coming fast. Corinne didn't chill out, not one bit. She huffed and puffed every day, muttering about rules and staring at Jake like he was a villain in a movie. Jake tried to ignore her, but it was hard. That funny feeling in his gut wouldn't go away. He couldn't shake it, no matter how much he told himself it was nothing. And boy, was he right to feel that way, because Karen, she was just getting started. Something big was brewing, and Jake had no idea how wild it was about to get. Days went by, slow and steady, in Jake's little neighborhood. The sun came up, the birds chirped, and everything seemed normal except for Karen. She got nosier every single day. It wasn't just a little peek here or there anymore. Nope, she turned into a full-on spy. She'd stand behind her big green hedge, the one that separated her yard from the street, and watch Jake like a cat watches a fish in a bowl. Her eyes were sharp, and she didn't miss a thing. Every time Jake stepped outside, she was there, peeking over the leaves. And she wasn't just looking, she had a little notebook, too. A tiny one with a pencil tucked in the side. She'd scribble stuff down, fast and sneaky, like she was collecting secrets. If Jake watered his flowers, scribble. If he tossed a ball for his dog, scribble, scribble. If he sat on his porch with a snack, scribble, scribble, scribble. Jake didn't know what she was writing, but he saw her do it. He'd catch her sometimes, her head poking up over the hedge, her pencil moving quick. He'd wave just to be nice, but Karen never waved back. She'd duck down real fast, like she didn't want him to know she was there, but Jake knew. He wasn't dumb. He started wondering what her deal was. Why was she so interested in him? It was weird, and it made his stomach feel funny, like when you're about to get in trouble but don't know why. Then one afternoon, things got crazier. It was a warm day, the kind where you want to be outside with a cold drink. Jake was in his backyard, messing around near that little hole in his fence. You know, the one Karen hated so much. He wasn't doing anything big, just tinkering a bit. Maybe he made the hole a tiny bit wider, just enough to stick his hand through and pass a soda to his buddy Tim next door. It was no big deal to Jake. He liked the hole. It was fun. But to Karen, oh boy, it was like he'd set off a bomb. She was watching, of course, always watching. She saw him by the fence, poking at that hole, and her face changed. It turned red, redder than a ripe tomato sitting in the sun. Her eyes got big and her mouth twisted up like she'd just sucked on a lemon. Jake didn't see her at first. He was too busy laughing with Tim about something silly. But Karen, she'd had enough. That little hole wasn't little to her anymore. It was a giant problem, a rule-breaking disaster. She couldn't take it. She whipped out her phone from her pocket, her fingers moving fast. She didn't even wait a second. She dialed 911, yep, the emergency number, and started yelling into the phone so loud Jake could hear her from his yard. "There's a suspicious man breaking rules in my neighborhood," she shouted. "Send help now." Her voice was high and shaky, like she was scared out of her mind. She paced back and forth on her porch, waving her free hand in the air. "He's up to no good, hurry," she added, glaring toward Jake's house. She sounded like she thought Jake was some kind of bad guy, like he was robbing a bank or something. But all he did was make a hole a tiny bit bigger. That was it. Nothing scary, nothing dangerous, just a hole. Meanwhile, Jake had no clue what was coming. He was still in his backyard, sitting on a chair with a glass of lemonade in his hand. The ice clinked in the glass as he took a sip, cool and sweet. He leaned back, looking up at the sky, feeling relaxed. His dog, Buddy, was napping in the grass nearby, snoring a little. Everything was calm, peaceful, perfect. Jake didn't hear Karen's yelling at first. The hedge blocked most of the sound, and he was too busy enjoying his day. He didn't know a storm was heading his way, a big, loud, messy storm that Karen was stirring up all by herself. He was clueless, just chilling, while she was over there calling the cops like it was the end of the world. But here's the thing, Karen didn't know something huge about Jake, something really, really big. It was a secret, a surprise, like a present you don't expect until you open it. She thought he was just some regular guy, some new neighbor who didn't follow her precious rules. She had no idea who he really was, and that secret, it was about to flip this whole crazy mess upside down. It was like a twist in a story, the kind that makes your eyes go wide and your mouth drop open. Karen didn't see it coming, not even a little bit. She was too busy being mad, too busy scribbling and yelling to figure it out. The next day, Jake started noticing more stuff. Karen didn't stop with the phone call. Nope. She kept spying. Early in the morning, when Jake went out to grab his newspaper, he saw her curtains twitch, just a little wiggle, but enough to know she was there, peeking again. Later, when he took Buddy for a walk, he caught her standing by her mailbox, pretending to check it. But her eyes weren't on the mail, they were on him. She'd look away quick when he turned her way, acting all casual, but Jake wasn't fooled. She was watching his every move like a hawk waiting to swoop. It made Jake feel funny, not scared exactly, but weird, like he couldn't just live his life without someone staring at him. He didn't like it. He started wondering what she'd do next. Would she yell at him again, write more notes, call someone else? He didn't know, but he could tell she wasn't done. That 911 call wasn't the end, it was just the start. And every time he thought about it, that funny feeling in his stomach got a little stronger. A couple days later, something else happened. Jake was in his yard, tossing a ball for Buddy when Tim came over to chat through the fence hole. "Hey man," Tim said, leaning close. "That lady's been asking about you." Jake stopped tossing the ball and looked at Tim. "What do you mean?" he asked. Tim shrugged. "She knocked on my door yesterday, wanted to know how long you've lived here, what you do, stuff like that. I told her to mind her own business." Tim laughed, but Jake didn't. His eyebrows went up. "Oh, she's asking about me," he said. Tim nodded. "Yep, she's obsessed, dude." That was new. Karen wasn't just watching now, she was digging, trying to find out stuff about him. Jake didn't get why. He wasn't hiding anything, or so he thought. He was just a guy with a dog and a house and a little hole in his fence. But to Karen, he was a mystery she had to solve, and she was getting nosier by the minute. It made Jake wonder what she'd do with all that info she was collecting. Her notebook must have been full by now, packed with little scribbles about his every move. It was creepy, and it made him feel like he was in some kind of game he didn't sign up for. The tension kept building, slow but sure. Every day, Karen found a new way to be annoying. One time, she stood by her hedge with a tape measure, measuring how far Jake's fence was from her yard. Another time, she took pictures of the hole with her phone, zooming in like it was evidence. Jake saw her do it and waved, but she just scowled and kept snapping. He started feeling like he couldn't even step outside without her judging him. It wasn't fun anymore, it was stressful. But here's the kicker, that big secret about Jake was still hiding, waiting to pop out. Karen didn't have a clue. She thought she knew everything with her notebook and her phone calls and her sneaky stares, but she didn't, not even close. Jake didn't even know how big it was going to get. He was just trying to live his life, sipping lemonade and playing with his dog, while Karen built her little war against him. She had no idea what was coming, something wild. Something that'd make her wish she'd left that hole alone. And so the days kept going. Karen kept spying, Jake kept wondering, the storm kept growing. And that secret, it was getting closer to busting out, ready to turn everything into a big, crazy surprise. Karen thought she was in charge, but she was. Not even a little bit. Something was about to happen and it was going to be huge. The big moment finally came and it was wild. A police car rolled up to Jake's house, its red and blue lights flashing bright in the afternoon sun. The tires crunched on the gravel as it stopped right in front of his yard. Karen was watching it all from her porch across the street. She stood there with her arms crossed, a big smug grin plastered on her face. That grin said everything. She thought she'd won. She'd called 911 about Jake and that little hole in his fence, and now she was sure the cops were here to take him away. She was practically bouncing on her toes, so excited to see him get in trouble. She'd been waiting for this, dreaming of it, ever since she first saw that hole. To her, Jake was a rule breaker, a problem, and now she'd get to watch him pay for it. The two officers climbed out of the car. They were tall and serious, with shiny badges on their uniforms and hats pulled low over their eyes. Their boots made loud thumps on the ground as they walked toward Jake's yard. Karen leaned forward, her eyes wide, her grin growing even bigger. She was practically giddy, like a kid about to get a giant ice cream cone. She could already picture it, Jake getting yelled at, maybe even handcuffed, dragged off for breaking her precious rules. She'd be the hero of the neighborhood, the one who stopped the troublemaker. Oh, she couldn't wait. The officers got to Jake's gate, a little wooden one that creaked when it opened. They knocked on it, 3 loud bangs, bam, bam, bam. Jake was in his backyard, still sipping his lemonade, his dog Buddy snoozing in the grass nearby. He heard the knocks and stood up, brushing off his pants. He wasn't scared or worried, he just figured someone was stopping by to say hi. Maybe it was Tim, his buddy from next door, coming to chat through the fence hole again. Now Jake walked over to the gate, calm as could be, and swung it open. "Hey, guys," he said, giving a little wave. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he was about to find out. Karen held her breath, watching from her porch. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. She expected the officers to frown, maybe point at the fence hole and start asking tough questions. She thought they'd grab Jake by the arm and march him to the car, telling him he was in big trouble. She was so sure of it, she almost clapped her hands. But then something weird happened. The officers didn't yell, they didn't grab him. Instead, they smiled, big friendly smiles. And then they shook Jake's hand. One officer grabbed Jake's right hand and gave it a good shake like they were old friends. The other officer slapped Jake on the back, laughing a little. "Good to see you, man," one of them said. Karen's jaw dropped. Literally, her mouth fell open so wide you could have tossed a ball in there. Her smug grin disappeared faster than ice cream on a hot day. She blinked, then blinked again like she couldn't believe her eyes. What was happening? Why were they shaking his hand? Why were they laughing? This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She leaned even farther forward, almost tipping over the porch railing, trying to figure it out. Her brain was spinning and her face turned all white, then pink, then red again. She looked like a balloon about to pop. See, here's the big secret. Jake wasn't just some random guy with a fence hole. Nope, he was an off-duty cop, That's right, a real police officer, just like the one standing in his yard. He'd been keeping it super quiet, not telling anyone in the neighborhood. He didn't wear his uniform around or brag about it. He just wanted to move into his new house, relax, and live a normal life. He liked sipping lemonade, playing with Buddy, and chatting with Tim through that little hole. He didn't need everyone knowing he was a cop. He wasn't the type to show off. But now the truth was out, and it hit Karen like a giant splash of cold water. Jake looked over at Karen, still standing there with her mouth open. He gave her a big, friendly grin and waved. "Hey, Karen," he called out, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Looks like my buddies beat you to it." He laughed, and the officers laughed too. One of them tipped his hat at her like a little salute. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice all cheerful. The other officer chuckled and said, "Don't worry, we've got this under control." They weren't mad at Jake, they were happy to see him. They knew him from work, and they weren't here to arrest him. They were here because Karen's 911 call had brought them right to their friend's house. Karen's smug look was gone now, melted away like snow in the sun. Her face turned into pure shock, her eyes got huge and her hands dropped to her sides. She didn't know what to say. She'd been so sure Jake was a bad guy, a rule breaker who needed to be stopped. She called the cops, thinking she'd be the big winner. But now she was the one who looked silly. The officers weren't hauling Jake off, they were chatting with him like pals. They stood there by the gate, talking about stuff like the weather and how Jake's new house was treating him. It was all normal, friendly stuff, and Karen couldn't handle it. She took a step back on her porch, her legs wobbly. She'd been so loud, so bossy, telling everyone Jake was trouble. She scribbled in her notebook, taken pictures, even called 911, all because of a tiny hole in a fence. And now she saw the truth. Jake wasn't just some guy, he was one of the good guys. A cop, someone who helped people, not hurt them. Karen's big plan had flipped upside down, and she didn't know what to do. Her face said it all, shock, embarrassment, and a little bit of "oh no" mixed together. Jake, though, he was cool as ever. He didn't get mad at Karen or yell back. He just smiled and waved, letting her stew in her own mess. The officers stayed a minute longer, joking with Jake about the fence hole. "What's the big deal?" one of them said, peeking at it. "Looks fine to me." They all laughed again, and Karen's cheeks burned even redder. She made a huge fuss, and now she was the one who looked dumb. The cops weren't here for Jake, they were here because of her, and they weren't mad, they were amused. That was the big reveal, the moment everything changed. Karen thought she'd caught Jake breaking rules, but she'd caught herself instead. Jake's secret was out, and it was a good one. He wasn't a troublemaker, he was a hero, just living quietly until Karen's call brought it all to light. The police car's lights kept flashing, but they weren't for Jake. They were a big, shiny sign that Karen's plan had backfired big time. The cops didn't stay long at Jake's house. They were done pretty quick, just long enough to set things straight. One officer, the tall one with the hat, turned to Karen, who was still standing on her porch looking all flustered. "Ma'am," he said nice and clear, "it's his fence, his rules." He pointed at Jake's yard. "No crime here." His voice was calm but firm, like a teacher telling you to sit down. The other officer nodded, crossing his arms. They weren't mad, but they weren't messing around either. Karen opened her mouth to say something back. But the rules," she stammered, her words all jumbly. She waved her hands, trying to argue, but the cops weren't having it. They just shook their heads and turned away. Karen's face went red again, but this time it wasn't from being mad, it was from being embarrassed. She looked like a kid caught sneaking candy. She didn't know what to do, so she slinked back inside her house, quiet as a mouse. Her shoulders were slumped and her head was down like a dog with its tail between its legs. She shut the door fast, and that was that. No more yelling, no more pointing. She was done for now, at least. Meanwhile, Jake's neighbors started whispering. They'd all seen the police car, the flashing lights, and Karen's big fuss. At first, they thought Jake was in trouble, but then the truth got out. Word spread fast, like wildfire on a dry day. People peeked out their windows and talked over their fences. "Did you hear?" they said. "The new guy's a cop." It wasn't just a rumor, it was real. Jake wasn't just some regular guy with a dog and a lemonade glass. He was a hero, someone who'd been quietly keeping the streets safe. Nobody knew because he didn't brag about it, but now everyone did. By the next day, things got even better for Jake. Neighbors started showing up at his door, big smiles on their faces. One lady brought a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies. "Thanks for being you," she said. A guy from down the street dropped off a pie still hot from the oven. Kids waved at Jake when he walked by, shouting, "Hi, Mr. Cop." Everyone was so nice, so happy to know him. They didn't care about the fence hole anymore, they cared about Jake. He smiled back, saying thanks, feeling good inside. It was like the whole neighborhood turned into one big, friendly party. And Karen, she didn't come out much after that. Her blinds stayed shut tight, like she was hiding. No more peeking, no more scribbling in her notebook. She didn't march over to yell or call anyone else. She just stayed quiet, probably wishing she'd never made that 911 call. Everyone else was talking about Jake, the cool cop, while Karen was stuck inside, all alone with her grumpy thoughts. Jake looked at the fence hole a few days later. It was still there, small and simple. He thought about fixing it just to keep things neat. But he didn't rush. He grabbed some wood and a hammer one afternoon and patched it up, but only because he felt like it, not because Karen said so. It was his fence, his choice, and that felt good. Justice was served nice and easy, without any fighting. Karen learned her lesson, and Jake got to enjoy his home his way. And that's the whole story. One tiny fence hole flipped Karen's world upside down like a pancake on a hot pan. She thought she was so smart, so right, but she ended up looking silly. Funny thing is, the people who yell the loudest, who act like they know everything, sometimes know the least. Karen was all bossy and noisy, pointing fingers and calling cops, but she didn't see the real Jake. She judged him fast just because of a little hole, and missed the big truth hiding right in front of her. Jake, he didn't need to shout or show off. He stayed quiet, sipping his lemonade, letting the truth come out when it was ready. He didn't have to brag about being a cop, he just lived his life, and that was enough. The truth did all the talking for him, loud and clear, without him saying a word. It showed everyone who he really was, a good guy, a hero, not a troublemaker. So here's something to think about. Next time someone's quick to judge, acting like they've got it all figured out, take a step back. You never know who's really standing on the other side of the fence. Maybe they're more than they seem, just like Jake. People can surprise you, and the loud ones aren't always the winners. Sometimes the quiet ones have the best stories. What do you think? Did Karen get what she deserved? Was it fair that she ended up embarrassed while Jake got cookies and smiles? Drop your ideas below. I'd love to hear them. Stick around because I've got more wild tales coming your way. See you next time.